Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. John, nurse practitioner with Island Direct Primary Care, and we're going to start something new this month, and that is to invite a local community guest who is doing great things in our community. So today we have Paige Hubert with
Recharge Performance Therapy.
Recharge Performance Therapy. So I'm not quite sure exactly what that is, but that's why we're here today. So welcome, and Paige, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited. This would be really fun.
Yeah. So tell me, what is Recharge Performance Therapy?
Yeah, RPT for short.
RPT.
Hashtag.
It's kind of like R2D2, but okay.
So like what I do is I do pelvic floor physical therapy. So I'm actually mobile. So I go to everybody's homes and I treat there because it's the most natural environment that I can find to help all of my women. And normally with physical therapy, most people, you look at a clinic, you go to the clinic, they're like, oh, when does your back hurt? And you're like, when I'm doing the dishes, when I'm lifting my kid in and out of the crib. And you're like, great, let's try to remake that as much as we can with whatever we have in the clinic. I don't have that issue because I can be like, great, let's go watch you do this. Let's figure out what's actually going on with your body in your most natural environment. And honestly, I'm like, this is how healthcare should be. Like, I really miss the days of like where physicians would do house calls and then you can like, well, there's mold in your ceiling or whatever else that might be occurring, because then you're literally in their environment that they live every day in. And plus, it's just a lot more fun for me to get to meet everybody's kids and all of their pets, and then I still decorating ideas while I'm there.
Nice, nice. You know, it's funny. So when patients come in and we talk about microbiome or gut health, and we talk about nutrition and those kind of things, I often tell them, I say, look, go home, take a picture of your cabinet, right? So that I can see actually what's in there. And when I first started 2 years ago, I didn't have brick and mortar, so I did a lot of home visits, 1939 doctor's bag that I carried around with me, and that was kind of cool. And so I still do home visits if medically necessary, but it's super interesting to see what's going on in the space that you live in. So what do you think? Have you ever heard of this kind of therapy?
I've heard of it like once, maybe.
Yeah.
Don't really know what it is, but I like heard the term brought up. I know it's something with females.
That's awesome. And real quick, so I didn't even introduce Danny. So some of you guys have seen her a little bit on social media, is our business development manager. And so she's going to be working with members of the community, bringing information to you that should be helpful as well.
Yeah. So pelvic floor PT, it actually started out in the early, like late 90s, early 2000s. Everybody thought it was voodoo. It was like we were only helping, really, we were looking at women because a majority of the time women were showing up with these issues. A lot of the times it was post-baby at that point or post-menopausal, and they were like, we're having all these problems and nobody can figure it out. This was also like kind of the early times for hormone testing and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So it was really just like they embarked trying to figure out how to help women in a physical stance from the musculature and everything else that we can put our hands on, and then leave the rest of that to you guys. So what it really started out was people were like, what is this? You're doing what, where? And then it was just something that no physicians really bought into, but the more we started doing it and the more research that started backing what we were doing, it's even coming down to like we have physical therapists in certain hospitals for the like literally in the labor and delivery floors.
That's doing evidence-based
practice.
Yeah. So not voodoo?
Not voodoo. It's shocking.
Amazing.
But you know how this works. Anything in the textbooks is already, 10 to 15, if not 20 years old to begin with.
Right.
So when we were really starting to push for this in the early 2000s, it really was like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And so now, specifically, it is actually called pelvic floor physical therapy or pelvic health, depending on who you talk to. The terms are interchangeable. We can help men. I personally don't, because in their homes, it's a little bit odd, it's a little bit weird and kind of risky for me to be treating men's pelvic floors because that is the downstairs area, that is the saddle region, but there are pelvic floor physical therapists who do that. I specifically focus on women, and I do things all the way from fertility through menopause, and it's like a lot of the times you get, well, I haven't had a baby yet, so I shouldn't have pelvic floor dysfunction, and unfortunately, that's not the case. I'm 28. I've had no children. I've been in pelvic floor PT because this is a thing that occurs for a majority of women at some point in time, and it would be like back pain or anything else, or when you rolled an ankle when you were a child. Like nobody is like, oh, you're not old enough to roll an ankle yet. That's just not how it works. So that's generally where pelvic floor kind of started, and where we're at now is we're treating a whole bunch of things all the time, just not always with me.
Awesome. What questions do you have, Danny?
So How do you know when to come in for pelvic floor?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's really actually really dependent upon what's going on with you. So for me specifically, I broke my tailbone in like 8th grade playing basketball. I couldn't sit for like a week. Should I have gone to pelvic floor physical therapy then? Yes. Did my poor father have any clue of what that was? No. And it also wasn't a really big deal then. But anything like pain-wise in that area, low back pain tends to be something that, especially for women, is highly related to uterine issues, whether it is a pelvic organ prolapse or something of that nature. We get a lot of just general like pee leakage, fecal leakage, not being able to hold in toots. Those are all like big things.
Toots?
Toots.
Is that like a flat chewed loops?
There's a whole term for it and I never remember it. I'm like, you can't hold in your toot, we have a problem.
Gotcha.
But there's a lot of different aspects to it. A lot of the times we get some even hip pain that they've done the whole orthopedic side of things and they're like, my orthopod says there's nothing wrong with my hip joint, but it hurts. Well, there is actually 2 separate hip muscles that are a part of your pelvic floor physical, like, or your pelvic floor anatomy. And so when we can't figure out what's going on with the hip, but it's still painful, a lot of the times your pelvic floor is involved. And nobody generally but me is looking at it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And in case anybody doesn't know, your pelvic floor is your saddle region. It's the muscles that actually enclose the anus, the vagina, and your urethra. And they also pull on your clitoris because sex should be fun.
So can you walk us through what an appointment would be like for your pelvic floor?
Yeah. So no matter what, I'm calling everybody. They're talking to me directly on the phone before I even see them because they need to like me. They need to know who I am, and I actually need to know what we're treating. Because every now and then I'll get a phone call of somebody who actually has like a UTI, some other types of burning with urination, things that I'm not treating. So those are people like I want to talk to beforehand so that I can just get them sent directly to where they need to go. The rest of everybody we call, we get scheduled. I show up to their house. I have my like backpack on and my massage table like on wheels behind me. I look like I'm moving in. I swear I leave. I've actually, a couple of husbands actually asked me. They're like, "Are you leaving?" Like, give me 2 hours. I'm out of here. And so I walk in. We set up. We start talking. Like we spend at least 30 minutes going through like everything that's going on with you, because specifically what you're feeling in your body is not going to be what I felt in mine when I needed pelvic floor PT. I want to know everything from when did you first start having your menstruation, like what's going on specifically with you. For people that are like have had kiddos, like I want to know what labor was like. I want to know what your birth was like, because no matter what, your birth story is your birth story forever, and there's trauma associated with that, like whatever might be occurring. Like we need to go through and deep dive into all of these details, which unfortunately doesn't always happen in a clinic because we have time constraints. But kind of what about me is I'm spending 2 hours with these clients, especially on our first visit, because I need to know. So like we're going and looking from literally from your toes all the way up to your nose for the most part, because I want to know what's going on with your whole body. Because if we're not walking right, or we've had ankles that are really rolled and they're not comfortable, or we're not walking well, that affects what your pelvic floor has to do, because we transfer force from our feet all the way up to our shoulders and generally into our neck. So all of this is fair game for what's going on with your pelvic floor. And so I'm looking at all of that. I'm looking at your back. I'm looking at everything that's going on with you. You're like, well, I have back pain occasionally. I'm like, great, let's look at it. Let's find out why. I want to know what's going on with your body, and then we move forward, if they're comfortable, into a pelvic floor exam, which starts externally. And I say this as a caveat, you should be 100% comfortable with whoever's doing your pelvic floor exam. And it should start externally and then move internally if you are comfortable with it. And no matter what, you always have the power in these sessions, whether it's with me, another pelvic floor PT, a gynecologist. If you are not comfortable, say something, and then we should be either A, fixing the reason you're uncomfortable, or B, getting you to the next person who will be more comfortable with. So we start externally, and that does require losing underwear, losing pants, having a towel over you, gloves, all kinds of really fun things like that. And we're looking, are those muscles moving well? Because they are muscles. Like if all those muscles are super squishy, like the inside part of your thumb, great, we'll test your strength. We'll figure out why else, are your symptoms occurring. Most of the time we don't make it there because, like I said, 95% of my patient population are overly tight. If I test their strength on overly tight muscles, I'm just testing how tight their muscles are. It's not true strength. So if they are really tight, we have to reteach those muscles how to relax again, because your body's gotten so used to just holding them. It's like, this works. It's not very fun, but it works. And like, okay, great. That's not what we really need them to be doing. So we're going to look at a pelvic organ prolapse test, because most women, after they've had babies, have at least heard that term before.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So that is actually where some of either your uterus is coming down into the vaginal canal, creating a bulge. So it really looks like all of a sudden there's a ball at the opening of your vagina. If you've never looked at your vagina, please do so. It's what's normal for you. These overly tight muscles. I have like an entire plan of care that they need to be moving through. And the first part is we have to get rid of the tension. Because if those muscles are just super, super tight all of the time, they're not helping you. And if anything, they're just kind of recreating these issues over and over again. So once we teach those muscles how to fully relax, we then get to reteach the brain how to use them.
So we're a primary care practice, a direct primary care practice. So we have a membership-based practice.
Okay.
And when a lot of our patients actually come to us because they have some kind of dis-ease, they've been seeing a primary care provider and no one's really kind of looking at the root cause of the problem. So we end up oftentimes kind of starting off where they're at and meeting them there where they're at, and then trying to determine what the root cause is. And that might be microbiome, that might be thyroid health, that might be female hormone health. So, you know, I often tell them this is all interconnected, right? And so how does hormone health affect your pelvic floor? How is it connected? Do you see that in your practice?
So I see it a lot because a lot of the times, especially for me, I do a lot in the OB world, so a lot of prenatal kind of work because I love babies. But so I see a lot of it with the infertility.
You're talking about infertility, which obviously isn't a woman who's postmenopausal, who's had babies already, and that's the kind of stereotypical patient that I would think of. We're talking about women who haven't had the opportunity yet. So go ahead.
Yeah, so what happens is a lot of the time we're looking at like different things like estrogen and progesterone. Most of the time those are like the two big things that people like immediately jump to when we're having miscarriages, because those are your massive sex hormones that most people are going to think about. However, those things play with the liver. Those things play with their thyroid. Those things play with the brain. So if there's something else going on, like where are we starting and why are we starting at all the way down this kind of chain of command? Really, the top parts of our chain of command are our stress hormones and their sugar levels. And if we're not addressing those, then everything underneath it gets affected. And so a lot of the times when we're just looking at estrogen and progesterone, we call those like a third tier hormone. Our top tier hormones are our stress levels and our overall blood glucose levels and different things like that. And those feed into your second tier hormones, which generally is your thyroid and some other things of that nature. And then those feed into your estrogen and progesterones. A lot of the times, unfortunately, most of women are just getting their estrogen levels and their progesterone levels checked. But then we're not looking at free estrogen. We're not looking at whether it's an estrogen dominance or progesterone indominance and progesterone's really, really low. Or are estrogen really low and progesterone's really high, or are they both low? Like, where are these numbers at and what's going on with them? And then we don't check the liver.
Well, I mean, even before we get to the liver, let's talk about those female hormones, right?
Yeah.
If you look at traditional labs, the ranges
are massive.
And you're talking about all the different phases of a woman's cycle. So a lot of times what I try to do is get women to determine when they ovulate, and then that's when we'll actually do the test, just to kind of give us an idea.
Right.
And it is amazing how many women out there have
no when they're ovulating.
When they're ovulating, or that they even have a hormone imbalance. And like you said, many of my patients that come in with polycystic ovarian syndrome, or they don't know they have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is often caused by estrogen dominance. And it's not necessarily, even though they have bad estrogens, from chemicals and lotions and all that pretty stuff that they like to put on, they often have a progesterone deficiency, so many of them. And so you really need to elevate that progesterone a little bit and get it down. But young girls you don't put on estrogen therapy. It's like, how do you get the estrogen down? And there's a lot of natural ways to do that. There's some supplements ways to do that, and we'll use that for a different topic, because we can get really in depth there.
Yes, that's a whole rabbit hole.
Right, it is a big rabbit hole.
And like I'm not a nutritionist. Like, I don't draw blood. This is none of my things. Like, I just am learning all of this stuff, and there's books out there. Textbooks, 400-page books that you can go read and figure out. Yeah, they're all in there. Like, I read the Fix Your Period book, and I really loved it because it's a massive shift in overall nutrition to correct hormonal imbalances. And so I really like different things like that. But just learning about overall what's going on with your body and what's considered normal. And we also, like, a lot of the times I don't want them testing progesterone until day 3 of their cycle, which is in the middle of a bleeding phase, which most women don't even know that your cycle starts with your period, not ends with your period.
That's right.
And that, you know, what your cervical fluid looks like and these different things that really we all should be educated on and be taught in school.
That's
you know,
awesome.
Hang on one second. Do you remember the classes where we were like, okay, this is what puberty looks like. This is a tampon. This is a pad. Watch this short video on explaining what you might be going through. And that was it.
That was it.
That was all we got.
Did you have that video?
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't get that video.
Well,
Well, that's because you were there before TV. It's fine.
Wow. I'm getting called out by the younger generation, but that's okay because, you know, in my household, oftentimes I actually talk to my daughters before they had their first period because I was the medical person. My wife's mother didn't share with her what's supposed to be happening, and I did. I was very comfortable with it. And I actually had a young patient this week. She's a newlywed, and she's having a bunch of UTIs, right? And so we were just like, okay, y'all are humping like rabbits, right? And she's, you know, she just kind of, and I've known this young lady since she was really little. But anyways, we kind of went through the process, and then when I started talking to her about her cervical discharging color and these kind of things, and what's natural and what's not natural, and these kind of things, and how to determine, you know, when she's coming up ovulating and those kind of things, she's like, wow, nobody told me that.
Nobody.
Nobody
does
and
that.
she's already been to GYN. She's had a primary care provider. I mean, she's in her mid-20s, and nobody's had this conversation with her. And then I go, oh, well, don't worry about this. Wait till I start talking about pelvic floor. We have a guest tomorrow that's coming on, and we're going to be on social media talking about pelvic floor. And it's so important, not just for our more mature women, but our women who are just, you know, coming of age, right?
And this is honestly, I get themes within my practice, and it's like every week there's kind of a new theme that all of my patients start to focus on. And this week has actually been early, like, development of general life, like for my patients' daughters, as well as they've all been complaining. They're like, nobody told me that sex wasn't supposed to be painful, especially in the very beginning. Everybody is like, the initial assumption is that, well, especially within a religious community, is that sex is bad until you're married, and then it's not bad, and it's probably going to hurt the first time you have it. And it's like, that doesn't have to happen at all, but that's the general cultural assumption around it. And so, like, you know, I work with several members of churches. I work with several staff, you know, members like that are in their church on staff, and that's what they were told. And so, like, I, being a very religious person, I'm like, that's not how this works. And we can do so much better for our young women that are coming up by explaining what this looks like on a physiological level, and then being like, okay, the base of most churches is that you shouldn't be out there just throwing your cat around, which is fine. However, like, we need to be talking about what this really looks like and what they should be expecting and what's normal, what's not normal, because it's not normal to have pain with sex. It's not normal to have recurrent UTIs after intercourse, because there's something going on. Especially with her, it's like, okay, from just a hygiene level. Like, are you going to the bathroom immediately after? Because you should be. Is it hard? Like, what do you even look like down there? Because the majority of women have never looked at their downstairs area because it's shameful. And that's a massive part of what I do is like, this isn't shameful. Is your armpit shameful? Well, no, it's my armpit. I'm like, great. It's your perineum. And that's another thing is like, everybody's like, this is my vagina. And I'm like, no. Your vagina has its like own separate area. This whole thing, your whole downstairs area is not your vagina. That's fine. It's called your perineum. It's fine.
Right.
But they're like,
I didn't know that.
right. Like, nobody talks about it. And it's like, okay, well, these are all the different areas. Like, you have labia for a reason. Like, they're there to help protect things.
Two.
You have two. There's a major and a minor.
That's
and like,
right.
what are they doing? And people are like, the number one question I get on my first like exams are like, am I normal? I'm like, yes, you are normal. Like, everybody looks different the same way, like, all of us have slightly different ears and slightly different noses, and like, you look different down there from even your biological sister. You might have some similarities, but that doesn't make it like abnormal that you look this way or that they look that way.
Oh, and fragrance.
and fragrance,
Yeah.
and like what you smell like, what you look like, what your discharge is like, because we have like general basis of like once you get off of your cycle, like everything should be decently dry. And then it becomes like slowly but surely start building up in like actual discharge and cervical fluid. And we have what it builds up into is called fertile cervical fluid, which is almost like an egg yolk kind of consistency. It's really thick, it's really slimy. It's really cool because it actually has like these channels that like direct sperm to where they're supposed to go, because the whole point of your body is to get pregnant every month. That's what it's literally made to do. So like this fluid actually helps the survival of the fittest, and which is legitimately what birth is. And like once that changes, it becomes non-fertile cervical fluid, and it becomes more pasty-like, more thick, really creamy, and then it starts to dry up, and then you hit your cycle. And this happens every single month, unless you're not ovulating, which is a problem. Because if we're not ovulating, our body is not creating a bunch of the hormones that we need every month for healthy organ function, for healthy blood levels, for healthy brain function, for anxiety, for depression, for sleep, for gut health. All of these types of things actually occur like cyclically every month. And when we're on hormonal birth controls, we don't ovulate. You might have a bleeding phase, but we call it a free bleed or a fake bleed, because you're not actually ovulating. You just wind up building up estrogen, because it's normally an estrogen or a progesterone based thing. And then your uterus, the lining of your uterus gets to be thick enough, and your body goes, okay, cool, well, it's time to shed it now that all the hormones are gone and we're on that like, fake pill cycle, the sugar pills. And then you shed your lining, but you're not actually ovulating. So these are things nobody talks about. And this is also why like cancer, lupus, thyroid issues, all of these things have had a significant incline since the 70s. It's legitimately from the pill that was supposed to give us freedom to not have children. And fun fact, the pill was actually created for men. Like it was originally created to be a male birth control.
Right.
But the men did not like the side effects that occurred with it, so they flipped it to women.
Oh, it's horrible even now. So I have, I have one biological son. I help raise a couple other young men, and so in my family we have African American, we have Jewish, we have white, and talking to them about male contraceptive was just so difficult. They're like, I won't get into the details of the conversation, but forget a pill. I mean, even just wearing a condom was an issue. And so I really had to kind of go through the process and educate them of the why, to do that. And then the importance from a women's perspective, not only from, it's much more than just not
having children. It's a massive health issue.
It's a massive health issue.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Danny? A lot of new stuff?
Lots of new stuff. I think it's great we're talking about it, having an open dialogue, because I feel like a lot of girls and women are scared to talk about it. They think it's bad or might be judged, and they don't know what that's normal and that's okay. So I think this is awesome.
Yeah. Or dirty, right? I mean, it's just like, I don't want to talk about dirty or shameful. And so I get in those conversations quite a bit with sexually transmitted infections, right? And I have to really, I spend a lot more time encouraging the women than the men. The men, again, we won't go there. But when we're talking about the women, they're just shameful and dirty and invaluable, and and their self-esteem is crushed and stuff like that.
It's a worth issue.
And I have to let them know that, look, you're not dirty and you're not bad. And this is the process, and this is how it happens. This is how you can protect yourself. And here's the healing process. And just remind them that they're lovable, right? Because they lose so much of that during the disease process. So, well, kind of bringing this to the end. If there's, besides telling everybody how to contact you, right? Because I want you to do that. What's the one thing you want to leave our viewers with?
Yeah. So my biggest thing for everybody is ask questions. If you are feeling like you're not being heard, or that this is just being brushed under the rug, whatever it might be. Like I have a mama right now who her concerns were like, oh, this is normal after childbirth. No, we want you to do nothing but lay in a bed for 4 weeks after childbirth. And yes, your pelvic organ prolapse, it's fine, no worries. And like, it's just swept under the rug for her. And that's so many of my clients. Whether it's pelvic pain, I have an 18-year-old with severe pelvic pain, can't even insert a tampon. And she's been menstruating for 3-4 years now and just been swept every single time. So if there's something going on with you that you don't understand, ask him, ask me, find us on social media. You can make a fake account and then we won't even know who you are, but we need to be able to at least bring up these topics because they're getting ignored.
Yeah, sure.
And it's not okay. And this happens a lot with women's health. And I think because a lot of the times women are seen as like, oh, we'll just suck it up and deal with it. And this happens a lot less for men because if men have pelvic pain, it takes about 3 days to get them in for an MRI. For women, it takes about 10 years if they have pelvic pain to get in for an MRI. So like, it's things like that that are not okay. And that's part of like my greatest mission in Brevard is that we are bringing up these topics in a safe way, in a culturally sensitive way, like in appropriate manners. But know that you're heard, know that you're seen, and that these are normal questions to be asking. In the other parts of the country, these are all actually normal conversations.
Right.
We will get into what happens here in Brevard County, but like these are all things that should be talked about often, should be talked about with our daughters, should be talked about during puberty, should be talked about with newlyweds, should be constantly brought up and educated on because it is a normal physiological thing that's occurring.
Right.
And then talking about things that aren't normal, like peeing yourself or having these types of pain, like, you know, issues with menstruation, like fertility issues, those aren't normal, but they are considered normal because nobody wants to talk about them because they're afraid to be like, I pee myself. And I'm like,
Sure.
I get it. Like socially, nobody wants to be that person, but you're not alone. Like one out of every 2 women at some point in their lives pee themselves, not on purpose. We won't go into that either.
Right.
And like it's under the people under 45 that don't have kids, it's 1 out of 4 women are leaking urine. Under 45 without kids, and then 1 out of every 8 high school girls is actually leaking urine in high school. And we're not talking about it because it's shameful.
Wow.
We're not bringing these things up, so they're dealing with it. A lot of your dancers, a lot of your athletes, your gymnasts are all leaking themselves, and nobody's talking about it.
So how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so it's definitely on like Instagram. I'm all over Instagram. Like,
So what's your call sign, your hashtag?
My hashtag, my handle.
Your handle, that's it. Hey, you know, it is what it is. That's why I hired Danny.
My handle is Recharge Performance Therapy. You can find me through hashtags, like hashtag Recharge Performance Therapy, hashtag RPT. You can also find me under hashtag Dr. Paige. I'm all over Instagram. I'm all over Facebook. They can go to my website. My phone number on my website is literally my cell phone. Text it, send me an email, whatever it is. Like I'm here to just get this more information out there.
Awesome. Thank you. That's Dr. Paige, Doctor of Physical Therapy. And and like she said, nobody should feel overwhelmed and everybody deserves to be heard. And so take that back to your providers, whether it's me, whether it's someone else, it doesn't matter. You guys deserve to have someone that listens to you. And so if you want to reach myself at john@islanddpc.com or www.islanddpc. What's our handle, Danielle?
It's Island DPC on Instagram and Facebook.
And Facebook. Awesome. So we look forward to hearing from you guys. And if you guys have any interest on any specific topics or just have some direct questions, when you watch this video, please feel to put them in the comments and we will get Dr. Paige or myself will get answers for you. So have a wonderful, blessed day. Take care.
Thank you.